Welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 10, Episode 8. Welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network of podcasts brought to you by HK. Today is Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024. I am your host, Jacob Paulson, and I am also joined today by Brian McLaughlin. Doc, as it were. Howdy, Doc.
Howdy. Thanks for having me once again.
Yep. And don't forget to follow us on all the social medias so you're up to date with the latest news in the firearm industry and all the goodness and awesomeness, etc. Today, we're going to bring you the headlines. We got a lot of headlines. We're going to talk about a lot of Supreme Court stuff, a lot of ATF drama. Of course, we got to talk about Hunter Biden. We're going to talk about bump stocks, pistol braces, felony convictions, all sorts of goodness. We're going to talk about how there's been some hacked/leaked data. I don't know, whatever that means. About guns making their way to Mexico. Of course, we know about the Fast and Furious, but there's a little bit more detail to other sources where guns are coming from. And we're going to learn a little bit about what state seems to be selling the most guns. So all that here in a minute. But first, some words from our sponsors. Our first sponsor of today's episode is, in fact, HK. And HK, kicking butt and taking names, making awesome guns and stuff. I've been really impressed recently with the VP9SK. Just in terms of its form factor. I think that in a world where we're so excited recently about P365s and X macros and Shield Pluses and Hellcats and those kind of that new generation of kind of these new micro compacts, I actually think that the SK might blow all those out of the water for me. So check it out today. Go to Heckler & Koch's website and get yourself a brand new HK, and you too can be awesome. I was going to say shoot like me, but no one wants to shoot like me. Right? I'm not. You too can shoot like somebody who shoots really well. And also today's episode is sponsored by Tactical RX, which is my go-to source for shooting eyewear, safety eyewear, not just for shooting, frankly, but for anything. I think they make the best. In fact, last week, I got a new pair of glasses from Tactical RX. I'm really pretty stoked about them. I don't think I can reach them from where I'm sitting right now. I'd have to get up. But they made me some custom glasses they have these yellow. They have these yellow lenses that are kind of proprietary. They're not your traditional amber lens. They're really cool. Like they make everything brighter and easier to see in like a low light scenario. But they do it without eye strain, without like your eyes feeling like there's a lot of brightness, which makes your eyes tired. It's not good for your eyes. And they generally only make these lenses in certain of their frames. And I went in the other day and I was like, I want that lens, but I want it in that frame. And they're like, oh, we don't do that. And I'm like, well, what's it going to take for you to do that? And like, we can do that. So anyway, Tactical RX, check those guys out. They rock. They make the highest quality, lowest cost safety eyewear in the game, in my opinion. Yep. That's what I'm saying. I'm sticking with that. And there are a couple slots left at the Guardian Conference. If you're not already signed up, make sure you go do that right away. GuardianConference.com. Okay, Brian, we got an interesting episode today. All sorts of drama been going on in June, and we're going to try and recap some of that and get people the deets if they haven't been paying attention on what's been going on.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. They got Supreme Court fights going on, a lot of different gun gear add-ons that they're talking about. And then some other things with, like you said, the U.S. gun sellers behind the Mexican cartel violence. A lot of firearms coming from the U.S. going down to Mexico to go fuel all of that. So, yeah, a lot of interesting stuff out there today.
Yeah, super fun. So let's start with the Supreme Court. We're actually going to have a couple of stories that are going to touch on the Supreme Court. One that's relatively, I'd say, good news, and one is sort of like, we don't know if this is good or bad news. At least for now, it's neutral. So let's start with that one. And the story that we're going to link to in the show notes is from Politico.com, which is a website that seems to lean whichever way the wind is blowing. But anyway, the title of this particular article is Supreme Court Dodges New Fights Over Gun Rights. And this is relatively new news within the last couple of days or so, within the last week, certainly. So if you haven't already heard, this is an interesting one. But basically what went down here is the Supreme Court said, nah, we ain't going to hear this right now. So there's typically 4 different cases that were being submitted to Supreme Court, 3 of which are all kind of in the same vein. And they turned all 4 away. They're like, you know what? We're just not going to mess with these right now and we're going to get in more detail, but the three of them that are all in the same vein, they basically said, you know what, like lower courts who sent these up to us, like look at this again in context of a Supreme Court decision we made last month, which we're going to have to talk about here in a minute. And then the other one is the Illinois assault rifle ban. And they basically said, we're not going to look at this right now. We're going to look at this probably later. But for now, we're going to send this back down. So give us a rundown, Brian, kind of what's your take on this?
Yeah. So one of the things that I was thinking about with this particular case is, of course, like to me, it seems like one of the things that they decided to uphold was the federal law that bans alleged domestic abusers from having firearms. And that's, of course, a good thing in my mind. I think the argument against it so far has been, how do those people, who is notifying the authorities about this alleged domestic abuser? So you have people who might be making false accusations about somebody that they don't like as a way of just getting back at them for something, trying to mess them up and take away their guns and that kind of thing. And also there's the argument that somebody could want to do violence to somebody and ahead of time report them as a domestic abuser and have their firearms taken away, and then they can go in and do whatever they want in that particular situation. So I think this is kind of like one of those hard cases where I can agree with the idea of, upholding a ban of domestic abusers having firearms. But at the same time, I think how that gets decided is not something that people seem to be talking about too much.
Yeah, so for some additional context here, last month, the United States had a decision in United States versus Rahimi. So Rahimi is kind of what you're referring to, Brian. It's this case where the guy's like, hey, my Second Amendment rights were removed from me because I was, convicted as a domestic violence thingy. And I know that there's various tiers of that. I'm not trying to get into all the details or give you the details of his case. What's relevant is the U.S. Supreme Court. They heard that case, and the guy's argument basically was, hey, wait a minute. Last year or 2 years ago, however long, no, it was last year, in New York versus Bruin, the Supreme Court said in order to restrict Second Amendment rights, there has to be historical precedent, that there has to be some history, in the U.S., like back in the good old days, think like, 1800s, of that kind of reason for removing someone's Second Amendment rights. And so Rahimi went to the court and said, hey, wait a minute, like there is no historical precedent for me being stripped of my Second Amendment rights because I'm a domestic abuser guy. So I want my rights back because based on this new Supreme Court decision, New York versus Bruin, like y'all can't do that. So the U.S. Supreme Court last month rules, yeah, know what? Yeah, they can. Like we've decided, and it's kind of an interesting thing because it almost like is rewinding a bit of Bruin, right? Like last year they're like, hey, there's got to be historical precedent, and then this year they're like, well, unless maybe there's some exceptions when there doesn't need to be a historical precedent because some people just can't have these rights, and so that's what they laid down, and so now you have just a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday even, as recently, you have three different appeals that have been set up to the U.S. Supreme Court that they sent all back based on, hey, we want you to relook at this based on our decision with Rahimi, how we said that despite him being a domestic abuser and despite Bruin, we still don't think he should have rights, because you had three similar cases. You had Garland versus Range. Brian Range was basically suing because he had a felony conviction because he lied about his income to get food stamps, and they took away his gun rights. And he's saying, hey, there's no historical precedent for that. And then there's two other ones too. I think United States versus Daniels, and there's another one too. Oh, Antoniuk versus Stephen. There, it took me a while to dig those up. So all three of those cases were instances where someone was saying, hey, because there's no historical precedent for taking away someone's Second Amendment rights based on convictions of various bad things that we did, we want those rights back. And the U.S. Supreme Court saying, hey, we just made a decision about this a month ago with the Rahimi dude, who was the domestic abuser guy. So we're not going to look at these three cases. We're going to send them back down and let the lower courts sort them out in the context of knowing how we just got done talking about the domestic abuser guy.
Yeah.
So that gives you some context for what the Supreme Court's doing with those cases. And it's a little bit awkward because, like I said, they're almost backpedaling. Like, there's got to be a historic, analog tradition for this. They're like, oh wait, except for in this case, then there doesn't need to be.
Yeah,
So it's a
and
little
being a
bit awkward.
lawyer, not being a lawyer, I have no idea about this at all. But this, to me, it seems like kind of like one of those cases of you know, guilty until proven innocent kind of a thing, where you're already being punished, by taking away their guns, and then you have to go and prove in a court of law that this hasn't or has happened. And it seems kind of like one of those types of things, like it's a guilty until proven innocent kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's a messy thing, which I have a hard time having an opinion, because felony is a blanket thing, right? You're convicted of a felony, you have no gun rights. Okay, but there's a lot of different kinds of felonies, not all of which are violence. So it's a guy lied about his income in order to get food stamps. Like, that's a criminal act. That dude should be punished for whatever the correct punishment is for somebody who does that. But should he lose his Second Amendment rights? I don't know. Right. So anyway, I don't pretend to have a lot of clarity as to how that should be managed. Only that there do seem to be incidents where people have been stripped of their Second Amendment rights when it feels like they shouldn't have been.
Yeah, that's a sticky one, especially when you are just taking away somebody's rights based on just a report by an anonymous person, or somebody who doesn't have that type of authority.
Yes, which is kind of where you started the conversation, and I agree with that 100 billion%. That's super duper not okay, right? Like, that goes back to that whole red flag drama. Like, we can't remove someone's rights without due process. And due process, we got a bunch of amendments to the U.S. Constitution to require due process, right? Right to face your accusers, right to be faced by a jury of your peers, all sorts of things. Right to Fifth Amendment, right to not have to testify in your own guilt. Like, there's all sorts of things. Like, so we can't just willy-nilly be stripping people of rights without due process. That seems ridiculous. Now, at the same time, the Supreme Court. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, at the same time, the Supreme Court also sent back another case that they refused to hear. And this one is the one that I'm a little bit more like amped up on, because Illinois passed a law, basically banning AR-15s, assault rifles, whatever they want to call them. And this, there was a lawsuit. It's Harrell versus Rowell, Raoul. There's several court cases, actually, but this is the one that's relevant for our conversation. And the basic lawsuit is saying, hey, this assault weapon ban in the state of Illinois is unconstitutional. So this gets sent up all the way to the Supreme Court, and we've been looking forward to this one. We're like, hey, Supreme Court, time to set the record straight on good old AR-15s or whatever. And the Supreme Court sent this one back down. They said, hey, you know what? We're not going to listen to this one right now. In fact, I want to read from here what Judge Thomas wrote about this. Let's see if I can find this exactly. He said, quote, the Seventh Circuit's decision illustrates why this court, referring to the Supreme Court, must provide more guidance on which weapons the Second Amendment covers. By contorting what little guidance our precedents provide, the Seventh Circuit concluded that the Second Amendment does not protect militaristic weapons. And then, big word, tautologically define militaristic weapons as those that, quote, may be reserved for military use. And he goes on. But the point is, he basically said, in fact, I'll get to the very end of his quote. He wrote, in my view, Illinois' gun ban is highly suspect because it broadly prohibits common semi-automatic firearms used for lawful purposes. It is difficult to see how the Seventh Circuit could have concluded that the most widely owned semi-automatic rifles are not arms protected by the Second Amendment. So clearly, Judge Thomas thinks that this Illinois law that's banning these rifles is at very least highly suspect. But for various reasons, they basically said the timing is not right for us to look at this. We want to push this down and force the lower court to look at it again with these comments and then see what happens. And then if it comes back to us, maybe then we'll rule on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it looks, I think so they can only see a certain number of cases at a time because they have so much going on. So they have to revert that back down to the lower courts if that couldn't be handled there, so that they have the time to handle all the higher things, right?
Right. And so I don't think they're not saying, hey, this case has no merit. We don't want to hear it. We don't think it's important. Or by not agreeing to hear the case, they're also not agreeing with the current decision that has been made by the lower court. They're just saying, for whatever reasons, and sometimes they give very specific reasons, we're not going to hear this right now. And most of the time, the reason is, hey, children, we think you can figure this out on your own. Remember, like, these other things we said, like, we'll send it back to you and ask you to try again, please. That's generally how this goes. And so this is one of those that's undecided for now. It's unclear. If you live in Illinois, I know it's been a lot of start and go with this law. Like, it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. And you probably were really looking forward to the Supreme Court hearing this one. And it sounds like the battle's going to rage on for a little bit longer.
Yeah, it looks like they're just going to let them kind of play with it until they can get a hold of it. And I think that kind of like leads us into that next. Did you want to talk about more of this particular topic? Because there was a couple other ones there.
Related to that story, no. I mean, we could talk about some of the other Supreme Court stuff, but yeah, tell us what you're thinking. Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking about we just got done talking about how people with felonies, are they going to be prosecuted and get their weapons taken away? And I thought that just kind of led us pretty quickly and easily into President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, getting convicted on all 3 felonies. He was he has a firearms charge.
It does.
He bought a 38, I guess, if I'm remembering correctly. Let me pull the story up. But he got caught purchasing in 2018. He bought a revolver, I think a 38, and at that time he was addicted to drugs. And so when all of that came out, especially in his autobiography, is that right?
He wrote a book where he admitted being his drug addiction. Yeah.
Right. So he's self-incriminated.
Kind of hard to not be found guilty. Yeah. When you publish a book saying I was definitely on drugs at this period of time, and then someone's like, wait a minute, I think you filled out. I think you filled out a 4473. Let's go check. You did fill out a 4473 at that time, and on that form you checked a little box that said you had no drug addiction, and yet here in your autobiography you're saying that you definitely had a drug addiction. So yeah, the writing was on the wall with that one. Obviously, this is the kind of thing that gets a lot of headlines because there's political motivations behind this. I mean, justice be served, right? Like, the law is the law. You break the law, you have to, you potentially have to suffer the consequences of breaking that law. That's how it works. On the same token, I also know that less than 50 people a year are tried for lying on a 4473 in this country. So it's not like the ATF is super on top of it. It's not like the Department of Justice is like, man, we're going to be auditing all these forms, and every time someone lies, we're going to go after them. Like, it's just a very rare circumstance that someone gets charged because they lied on this form. But Hunter Biden, with great power comes great responsibility, or something like that.
Well, I mean, yeah. How many did you say it was that got prosecuted a year?
Last year that I checked, it was 36.
Wow.
I think we've never had a year with more than 50. So
That's
we're just not. Yeah, like, we have all these laws about the NICS system, the background check system, the Brady law, and it's all out there, and we're forcing all of us honest gun owners to fill out forms and wait for background checks to go through. But the reality is, we never prosecute anyone who doesn't follow those laws. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. If you're a convicted felon, you walk into a gun store and you fill out a 4473 and you check the box that says you're not a convicted felon, and they run the background check, you've just committed an additional crime. Okay? Like that, we're all clear on that, right? Same crime that Hunter Biden just committed. He didn't lie about being a convicted felon. He lied about a drug addiction, but it's the same charge. You lied on this 4473. Okay? Yeah. The difference is, one of those is kind of an honor code system. The guy behind the counter in the gun store has no idea if you're addicted to drugs. Right? If you check the box that you're not, I guess he'll just, okay. But if you check the box that you're not a convicted felon, and he runs and we run the background check, and the background check says, this dude is a convicted felon. How, like, that's an instance where we have a very clear, like, systematic way to identify people who are felons who are trying to buy guns, and we could prosecute them. And that happens thousands of times a year, and we never prosecute any of them. And that's my point, is that this is the kind of thing that very rarely is prosecuted. But if you're Hunter Biden, we're going to make sure we prosecute. And that's fine by me, by the way. I'm not upset about it. I'm just pointing out that there's clearly some political motivations here.
Sure. Well, I mean, he faces, according to the article, he says he faces up to 25 years in prison if he's sentenced. And then, but he's a first-time offender, so he's not going to get the maximum. And there's no guarantee they'll actually go to prison, and there's no sentencing date yet. But, I think this is always one of those things. Anytime I see someone famous or really well-connected get into trouble, you always want to see what's actually going to happen to them, And when it's like a really high-profile case like this, that you have to tend to like stick more closely to the rules, I would imagine. I mean, when it comes to the politics, I guess.
I think so. Generally, when you don't see an immediate sentencing, it's because the court anticipates an appeal, and Biden's legal team has communicated they do plan to appeal this decision. So this isn't over. There'll be an appeal and more drama. And, there's some quote from Biden that basically says, justice be served, kind of thing. So I don't know.
I wonder what this does for his arguments, because I had also seen a clip where Biden had been talking about gun control, and somebody piped up in the audience and was like, giving him crap about, his son just got convicted, for gun control stuff. And so I wonder how detrimental that is to their overall argument. I mean, it can't be good, but it can't be that bad either.
I think that both of those things are true. I think it's not good because here you are saying no more guns. Guns are bad. Let's regulate, or at the very least, let's regulate guns. And now your son is, breaking a gun law. So that's not good. But I think a lot of it is, I'm no political strategist or something, but I think a lot of it's about how you respond. It's less about what happens and more about how you respond. So the fact that Biden's not showing up in court every day, he's not asking, for any favors. He's just letting, kind of the process take its run its course, at least as far as us outsiders can observe. That would suggest to me that it's unlikely to have a significant amount of blowback, though we did just see the most recent presidential debate was that last week on like Friday or Thursday or something. We did see that Trump brought that up in the debate. He pointed at Biden and said, your son's a felon or something like that. He made a comment. I can't remember the specific comment, but So, political adversary is going to use any ammunition they got. They're going to put it in the gun and fire it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if Hunter had been planning to get into politics at some point, because this would pretty much shut that down. I would guess, right? If you're a felon, you're not allowed.
I'd say Hunter has, he has no hope. I mean, obviously you are allowed to, since President Trump is currently a convicted felon, and he's on the ballot. So apparently we're finding that that's not a deal breaker. And obviously there's all sorts of drama yet to be unfolded on that issue. But I think that between this and also other issues with Hunter Biden, as far as the incriminating stuff that was found on his laptop, as far as what appears to be political favors that that were traded in order to set him up with with Ukraine and some other foreign agencies and organizations. Yeah, I don't think it seems like he has a lot of skeletons in the closet. A political run would be difficult. But that's just Jacob's 2 cents as some random dude who doesn't follow it too closely.
Yeah.
No. All right. More awesomeness drama. So back to good news. Like we've had, I feel like it's been kind of, but now we got some good news. So give us the next one, Brian.
ATF pistol braces ruled vacated. Onward at August 5th.
Yeah. This is super goodness. So some backstory on this one. Back in the Trump administration, kind of awkward, for his campaign, for us to be talking about it. But back during the Trump administration, soon after the Las Vegas shooting that killed a bunch of people, the ATF decided to just decide. They just decided, because they felt like it, that bump stocks were machine guns. Okay, so the 1934 law. the NFA, National Firearms Act, which was passed in 1934, sets up that certain guns are illegal and certain guns and gun accessories, aka suppressors, are not necessarily illegal, but they require an ATF tax stamp and background check. So that law said, okay, machine guns, based on rate of fire, they're going to be illegal, and this continued in 1986 with the Fire and Motor Protection Act. But anyway, certain decisions were made there. So machine guns, an act of Congress has decided that machine guns are illegal, especially if they're manufactured after 1986. Now, the ATFs, they can't pass laws. They can't go amend the U.S. code, but they can interpret stuff. They can decide this is a machine gun that is not a machine gun, right? The ATF, they're the federal agency charged with making some of the decisions about some of the details, right, to execute these codes that have been passed. So under the Trump administration, the ATF makes this decision, this rule. They make a ruling, which is just a decision on their part, that bump stocks are now going to be treated like machine guns, and therefore they're illegal, and they need to be, given up and all the things. Now, there's been several lawsuits about this, and this most recent one went to a federal district court, and that's where this comes from. And this was back on June 12th or June 13th. And long story short is this federal district court vacated the rule. Basically said, this rule that the ATF wrote, it's out. It's gone. I'm cutting it from the record. It is no more a thing. And the key to understanding all this is what this district court is ruling is not that bump stocks are or are not machine guns. What this federal district court ruled is the ATF has gone beyond its authority to decide that these things are machine guns. That they have went, with the boundaries with which they have to stay in. This was not that. They went outside those boundaries to make this decision, and so we're vacating the rule. And to be clear, vacating means it is no longer a thing. It's as if it never happened.
Yeah. What is your opinion on these bump stocks? Because I have a very, very liberal friend, and we were debating this a little bit, and she was talking about how, like no one should have machine guns and that kind of stuff. And we can argue about that, quite a bit. But my thought on this is that you don't really need that. I don't think that bump stock, and I've not used one ever, never used it at all, but I understand how it functions. And I don't think that bump stock really increased the lethality of that Las Vegas shooter that much. In the military, with our personal weapons, the odds of us flipping it off and going to full auto, like, pretty much never happened. Like, you could get pretty much everything that you needed to get done with just single fire, and it wasn't that big of a deal. So in my mind, it feels like they are really pursuing things that really don't matter that much in the grand scheme and the grand context of things, and keeping people distracted by going after these kind of, like, I don't know, just non-starter kind of things, I guess.
I think the gun community sees it as a if you give a mouse a cookie kind of issue. Like none of us really care about bump stocks that much. I shouldn't say no one. I'm speaking generically, broadly, not literally. I think that generally speaking, we don't care about bump stocks. I don't own one. I've never used one. Don't care to ever own one or use one. But it's
Uh-oh. Looks like we lost Jacob. He's been having some internet connections lately.
going to let them pass rules about.
Oh, we lost you there for a second.
Am I back now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, you're back now.
Yep. Sorry about that. Let me repeat that. So I think at large, the community doesn't care about bump stocks. I don't care. I don't own one. Don't plan on buying one. The concern is, are we going to allow the ATF the authority to just willy-nilly determine that something's a machine gun just because they feel like it? That's the problem here. The problem is not bump stocks. The problem is that we can't allow the ATF to overstep its authority, because that's going to lead to other issues. So specific to bump stocks, I mean, you're the veteran, Brian. You said it better than I could. I mean, I don't know what the application is for that kind of a rate of fire. And what happened in Vegas? Did the bump stock make a difference? Arguably, it might have made some difference. He certainly got probably more rounds off per minute than he might have without it. But dude shot a massive amount of ammo out of a massive number of guns. And I don't know that it made that much of a difference. Regardless, it's not a big enough thing that it impacted America much when they were banned. It's the issue here is not the bump stock. The issue here is the ATF and them surpassing their authority, which we're going to see more of here in a minute.
In what way?
Well, I just realized that we crossed two stories here. We were talking about bump stocks, but I meant to talk about pistol braces.
Right.
So I'm sorry if we got these two things confused. I need to clarify for the viewers. So, because both of these things are on our docket to discuss today, and I want to make sure I'm not screwing this up. So let me be more clear and fix any mistake I might have made. So the pistol brace rule was vacated by the federal district court, and as I mentioned, on like June 12th or June 13th. But also about to say like the next day or something, the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, ruled that the rule against bump stocks also needed to be vacated, that it was unconstitutional for the ATF to overstep the boundary. So there's two separate things here. You got one from the U.S. Supreme Court, one from a federal district court, both basically saying ATF overstepped its authority. And so in both cases, those decisions are basically being vacated. One about bump stocks, one about pistol braces. So I'm sorry, I got those two a little bit crossed in my mind because they happened about the same time and they're both similar in many respects. And so I apologize to the audience if you're like, Jacob's off his rocker. That's not what happened. So we talked about bump stocks. Let me come back now and talk more about pistol braces for a second. Pistol braces, on the other hand, that's a whole different interesting thing. Like you asked me about bump stocks, Brian, I'm like, whatever. It's not about the bump stock. It's about the ATF being, well, I was almost about to use a bad word. The ATF overstepping its authority. Pistol braces are an interesting, different issue because I do not think that a bump stock is a machine gun, by the way, in case anyone's wondering. However, pistol braces are an interesting one. Small, short-barreled rifles are illegal. Without certain things in place, you can't go buy a short-barrel rifle. Length from this point to this point can't be less than X dimension, right? But for a long time, we've been using pistol braces basically as a loophole against that prohibition as a community, as a gun community. Pistol braces obviously was not manufactured or designed with the intention of it being a butt stock. It was intended to stabilize against an arm, when using that gun. But a lot of people basically said, hey, if it's legal to just stick this pistol arm brace on the back of a pistol, then I'll do that because it's not a rifle. It's not a short barrel rifle because it's not a rifle. It's a pistol. It just has this pistol arm brace thing. But then a lot of people are like, they're like, oh, but if you pick up the pistol and you use that arm brace as a stock against your shoulder, is it still a pistol or is it a shoulder? Well, based on the current rules and laws that were passed, it's still a pistol because the law doesn't say, it's not about how you use it, it's about what it is. And that's not a stock. It's an arm brace. Mm-hmm. And so it's been this very clear, I mean it quite transparently when I say basically loophole to have a short barrel rifle. But the thing you understand is that the ATF has ruled many times in the last 30 years, making it clear that the pistol brace is fine, that it's absolutely acceptable. And because the ATF has said it's fine, they've become extremely commonplace, right? I don't know how many millions of them have been sold, how many of them are installed on guns. And now all willy-nilly, one day the ATF wakes up and says, under Biden's direction, no more. These are now illegal because it's a short barrel rifle. That's a stock, not a pistol brace, or a pistol brace is a stock. Therefore, having on your gun is a short barrel rifle, and you need a tax stamp, get one or get rid of it kind of thing. And so now this federal district court has said, yeah, you don't have the authority to say that. Whether they are or are not stocks is for a legislative body to decide. The ATF can't willy-nilly just say that they are.
Yeah. What happens if somebody? Okay, so they buy themselves a one of these arm braces when it's legal. Then the ATF comes out and says, now they're not legal. Now somebody gets picked up or arrested for it and put in jail or whatever happens to them, and then the Supreme Court comes out and says like, no, that's actually not constitutional. You can't do that. It's like, what happens to that person that's in jail now? Do they? I'm guessing they would get let out, but do they get any like compensation or like do you know anything about what happens to
Well,
them?
that would be a civil matter, right? So they could sue for compensation. They could sue for damages. They could say, "Hey, I was illegally, unlawfully prosecuted, unlawfully convicted, unlawfully detained, and incarcerated," and so that has potential civil implications, right? You owe me money now, basically. And, I seek damages in the form of cash, please. So that's a civil thing. That's a civil lawsuit. That any given individual could file a lawsuit against that state or that county or the feds or whoever it is and seek damages. That said, I'm not aware of anybody having been charged and arrested during that period of time that they were illegal. And I think in part that's because so many challenges were immediately filed. Right, the second that decision was made, hey, these are illegal now. It's an SPR. The ATF also created some grace periods. Oh, you have until X date to go register this and get a tax stamp. And so no one was getting charged because the hope was that they could create compliance. And then all of a sudden, of course, all the lawsuits start coming. Oh, nope, we're going to sue the ATF. We're going to sue U.S. Attorney General. We're going to sue whoever to say that this, that they don't have the authority to do this. And so when there's a billion lawsuits been filed and you don't seem to have a lot of compliance, you don't just start, I shouldn't say you don't, but they did not just go out and charge anyone. So I'm not aware of anyone having been charged for having broken this rules change law thing during the time that it was a thing. But what's clear is it's not a thing now.
I'd also be interested to see like what kind of repercussions come to the leadership of the ATF. If the ATF is overstepping its bounds over and over and over again constitutionally, I mean, like maybe if there's like a one-of case and you're like, oh man, I just totally screwed this up. I made a huge mistake. Sorry. But if you're going to do that over and over and over again, that's a clear implication that something is not right in the leadership. Maybe they don't understand the scope of what they're doing, but it seems like there should be some like very negative things happening to the leadership of the ATF for having overstepped like this.
Well, let's ask this question. Who does the ATF work for? Like, who gets to decide who the director of the ATF is?
Oh, I don't know. Is it an elected position?
No. So that's the thing we have to I'm going to take everyone back to 5th grade for a second, right? Like just in your head, hear the School of House. What's that cartoon we always used to watch? School of Rock? School of How? Remember the song, I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill. School of Rock. I think it was School of Rock. Anyway, so the point is, we're going back to 5th grade. There are 3 branches of government, right? The 3 branches of government are legislative, judicial, and executive. So the executive branch of government, at which the head is our president, that person is in charge of federal law enforcement. So the FBI, the CIA, the entire military structure, everything military, the ATF, all federal agencies are part of the executive branch of government. So if the Biden administration, and I don't say Biden because I'm not sure the dude is aware of where he is each morning, but if the Biden administration, if they're the ones directing the ATF to go to they're saying, hey, go do some stuff, go help us with this gun control thing. Congress ain't going to pass no new laws. We want you to go help stop gun violence by making more gun stuff illegal. If it's the Biden administration telling them to do it and they do it, and then they get their hand slapped and told you can't do that, do you think the Biden administration is going to step up yeah, that was the ATF's fault. We better fire the leadership and get some new people in here? No. But that said, what you run the risk of is Biden not winning this election, Trump coming into office, and Trump saying, hey, clearly the ATF is screwed up. I'm going to clean house. I want all these dudes out. I want to hire new people. And it's not as simple as that. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's basically the reality of the situation, is that the ATF is a federal agency. The federal agency falls under the authority of the executive branch of government, which is the White House.
So they can pretty much just do whatever they want, but if they want to keep their jobs with the next president coming in, then they gotta, toe the line. But I'm guessing that doesn't matter too much to them. I mean,
My gut feeling is you do what the administration tells you because they're the ones writing your checks, and they're in this case the current ATF director was put into their position during this last administration, during this the current Biden administration. So clearly they got the power they got by doing what Biden wants or by promising to do what the Biden administration wanted. So if new president comes in and says, "Screw you, you shouldn't have done that," you're like, well, my head was probably going to be on the chopping block anyway because Biden put me here.
Well, that's sticky.
Yeah, that's well said. So this next one is interesting, out of Ohio, Brian.
So next one up on the list is the warning shot is enough for the jury to consider a self-defense claim. And this is coming out of courtnewsohio.gov, where a man, he was in an argument with somebody and he drew his weapon and intentionally shot towards the person. But his argument was that he was not intending to kill or harm him. He was just trying to scare him off or get him to leave him alone. And so there was a trial where they were trying to figure out whether or not this was going to be okay or not, and whether or not this was an act of self-defense or if he was going to be tried for assault. And in his testifying, he claimed that he didn't aim the gun at the other guy with no intention of harming him. He was just trying to get him to back off.
Yeah, this one's interesting. I think generally in our community, and certainly in this podcast, I think we've been consistent with saying that warning shots are generally not a good idea and arguably illegal. I don't think that's changed, by the way. I still think warning shots are generally a really bad idea and arguably illegal. In this case, it seems to be like a scramble by someone to try and justify the really bad decision and to avoid prosecution or a bad sentence. But let's kind of think about this a second. So the guy shoots toward this person. I mean, the person he's shooting at is sitting in a car, and the bullet hits the frame of the door of the vehicle. So you can call it a warning shot if you want, I suppose, but it looks suspicious to me to begin with.
That was a pretty accurate warning shot.
Yeah. Bingo. But, okay, so the guy goes to trial, and he testifies that he wasn't trying to shoot this guy. That it was not his intention. That his intention was just to scare him off. Okay? And the attorneys want to make the argument that it was self-defense, that warning shot, the firing of the gun, was an act of self-defense. And the judge in that trial basically says, no, I'm not going to allow you to claim that the warning shot was self-defense. And the judge basically does that by refusing to read the jury self-defense instructions. So if the judge feels that self-defense is a potential argument, it's a potential defense for that trial, then the judge reads to the jury instructions that are consistent with self-defense. Basically explains to the jury what qualifies and what doesn't qualify as self-defense. So the jury can make their own decision if that was or wasn't self-defense. But the judge just decides no, this was definitely not self-defense, so I'm not reading those instructions. So the trial ends and it gets appealed, and now this court, the Ohio Supreme Court, right? Yeah. The Ohio Supreme Court is saying, no. We think that it is viable to suggest that this warning shot could have been They're not saying it was self-defense, to be clear. They're saying that it has enough potential to be self-defense that the trial court should have allowed that as an argument and allowed the jury to decide if it was or wasn't self-defense. That's what the Ohio Supreme Court is saying.
Yeah. It says the Ohio self-defense law does not require an intent to harm or kill another, just the intent to repel or escape force.
Yeah, bingo. Exactly. So, and by the way, I think I'm fine with that. I'm fine with the idea that a warning shot could potentially be self-defense. right? That you're saying, hey, the reason I fired this shot was to protect myself and others. Like, I have no problem with that on the surface. I just still don't think it's a good idea, because if that warning shot hurts somebody, now we have bigger issues. Now we got other potential crimes we've committed because of our negligence and how we fired the warning shot. And there's all the other tactical questions here as well about, being down one round of ammo, among other things. So I'm not saying that warning shots are or aren't self-defense. Certainly the Supreme Court of Ohio is saying warning shots are potentially self-defense. Absolutely. I'm still holding to at least my opinion that warning shots are probably generally not a good idea.
And the reasons for that is we're responsible for each one of those rounds. It might tactically be unadvantageous. And then, that was it, right? Those are the two reasons you say?
I think there's other reasons. I think that there's a tendency for people to think that the threshold of when you can fire a warning shot legally is lower than the threshold of when you can shoot somebody legally. And that's not true. The threshold is the same.
Right.
And so I think part of it boils down to this misconception or this incorrect myth or belief that's not true, that causes people to think, well, I don't think I'm justified right now in shooting this person in self-defense, but so I'll just fire a warning shot. Got news for you. Like, either both of those are legal or neither of them are legal. Like like when you are or are not justified in self-defense is the same. So that's my first concern. And I know, by the way, if there's an attorney listening to this, I know I'm oversimplifying something, but I think that's generally valid. And the only way I know how to get through this in short order. So that's my first concern, is that just like, let's not forget that it's the same legal threshold of when they're acceptable. Yes. And then to your point, there's this responsibility of where of where the rounds land. There's also kind of this sense of, are we, a lot of times when I see warning shots fired, they are not, there's no imminent threat. Warning shot is often fired to keep people from escaping, and in order to help to submit them to custody to prevent their escape, not to actually convince them to stop an attack. I think that they don't make sense, because I have a hard time imagining a situation where a warning shot is practical, because if you really have an imminent threat that warrants a gun, therefore self-defense with a gun, or the threat of a gun, is justified, which that's what a warning shot is. We're talking about the threat of a gun, which, if self-defense is not justified, you're talking about aggravated assault with a deadly weapon or felony menacing, which in most states are minimum 10-year prison sentence. So if we've crossed the threshold where self-defense is viable, we have an imminent threat of death or death or serious bodily injury. If we've crossed that threshold, then we should be shooting. Like, then we need to stop the threat. That's the point. Is it's like, then why are we firing warning shots? If the person is within a distance such that they can that we have an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, then why are we warning them? Like, let's stop the threat, because the threat is imminent. Imminence is a requirement for self-defense. It's not self-defense if the threat's not imminent. And if the threat is imminent, then the time for warning is over. And that's my concern, is that there's not really a moment in the escalation of the threat where warning shots are justified and legal. Because the second they become justified and legal, what makes them justified and legal is the fact that you have an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. And if you have an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, like, warning shots, like, why are, like, stop the threat now? It's imminent. It's happening.
If you've got time to fire a warning shot, you probably have time to move yourself out of that situation, go somewhere else, de-escalate, or you're not in danger right now. Otherwise, you would just be shooting that person. I would guess.
I think that's well summarized. I think that's the way that we have to think about this, is in this context of, like, where in this escalation of force does the warning shot make sense and is legal? And generally, I think the answer is probably nowhere. Now, in this case, the guy is saying, hey, my warning shot was self-defense. And the court is saying, maybe, at least maybe it's possible, that so you should have been allowed to argue that in court. The jury should have been allowed to decide if it was or wasn't a valid argument. But it remains unlikely, even if it is legitimate self-defense, to actually be practically sensible. Because if you do have an imminent threat that warrants a gun, you need to be stopping that threat.
Yeah. Well, this is a good warning and a good reminder to all of our listeners to go get educated about firearm self-defense law and to check out CCW Safe, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's very valid. We got a fun comment here that I just put on the screen from a guy on YouTube, and he's actually made several comments, and I wasn't paying attention, so I felt bad I missed some of his earlier comments. But Matthew says here, didn't Uncle Joe say? But Uncle Joe said firing 2 warning shots from a double-barrel pump shotgun is sufficient to defend yourself, didn't he? And that is true. Our friend, Mr. President Biden, did tell people to go out on the porch and fire your shotgun into the air, and that would get the job done. So, maybe we could submit, if this guy ends up getting convicted in the retrial, maybe he can get a pardon from Biden. Be like, Biden, I was just following your advice, bro.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Clearly, he knows everything he needs to know about guns. So
that's right. All right, should we go to Mexico?
Yep, let's do the next one. It's hacked data reveals which U.S. gun sellers are behind Mexican cartel violence. And this is getting into talking about how guns are purchased primarily by straw man purchases in the U.S. and then transported down to Mexico to be used by the cartels and all the violence, which is kind of surprising to me. I guess it seems like it would be harder to get guns from the U.S. into Mexico than it's supposed to get them from other places. But I guess if that's how they're going to get them. So apparently, among 10 million records were hacked by an anonymous collective known as Guacamaya and shared with the news outlets by the Transparency Organization, Distributed Denial of Secrets, or DDO Secrets.
Yeah.
The Mexican Defense Ministry leak previously made headlines for exposing military corruption and surveillance abuse, and now traces the American-sold firearms recovered since 2018. And this is, of course, along that same line as the failed FBI sting, where they were transporting or purchasing illegally 2,000 guns at shops in Arizona and trafficking those down and hoping to arrest some of the kingpins that were down there. But then they wound up losing track of all of the guns, and it turned into a gigantic fiasco. So what they're saying is that like a big portion of the guns that are down there right now are a direct result of our own government, but there's also a significant number of them coming through because of straw man purchases.
Yeah, this is an interesting deal. Like, the Mexican government is filing all sorts of lawsuits against all sorts of American things. They're suing the American government. They're suing a various number of gun manufacturers. There's lawsuits against Glock and SIG and Smith & Wesson and all sorts of things. And now they also are basically saying, hey, we got all this other data. We're going to sue some specific gun stores. And the data is interesting. Like this article, which is on the USA Today site, which is relatively anti-gun, historically speaking, is pretty extensive in just kind of summarizing some of the data that was found. They point out top gun stores that, like, hey, of all the guns that were found in crime scenes or found illegally in Mexico, where do they come from? Okay, well, here are the gun stores that are high patterns of guns. So we see, Academy Ltd, 727 guns, Cabela's, 215 guns. And so they look at the specific stores, and then they also look at other things. They look at actual humans, like who are the actual straw purchasers who are most commonly doing this. And so there's some guy named Uriel Patino. 166 guns that have been found in Mexican crime scenes were purchased by this dude in Texas or Arizona or whatever. So, and then there's various other names too. This guy. And most of these are people who've already been charged, convicted, sentenced, and in some cases have already served all their jail time and are back out and free again. But the data is it's just more transparently saying, hey, look, these are the dudes who were the common ones. They also, the data, they break down the actual guns. So the Anderson Manufacturing AM-15, which is a AR-15 type variant made by a company called Anderson Manufacturing, is the most common. 504 of those have been found in Mexican crime scenes. The Colt 1911, 485 of those, and it goes on. So we're talking about this data that was hacked and then has been shared with all these news outlets. Makes it a lot easier for them to crunch the numbers and identify the top gun stores, the top straw purchasers, and the top guns or gun manufacturers who are leading to these guns showing up in Mexico. I think there's a couple interesting things here in terms of my opinions, Brian. The first one is we would be naive if we thought that there weren't gun stores out there who were breaking the law. Right? Like 80,000 FFLs in this country, of which I am one. And the vast majority of the 80,000 FFLs in this country are not out there purposefully trying to traffic guns to Mexico or breaking laws, right? Like they're following the rules, doing what they're supposed to do. Sometimes they might get taken advantage of when someone lies on a form and traffics the gun or whatever, but that's not the FFL's fault. Now, if the FFL is like breaking rules and breaking the law, then they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, right? So I don't think any of us are against that, but most of the time, that's not what's happening. If you think Cabela's is actively trying to smuggle guns to Mexico, you're a fool. Those guys don't care about Mexico. They care about making money and profits, and that means not going to prison and jeopardizing their $10 billion company. So those are instances where the purchaser, the guy who walks in the store and buys the gun, is breaking the law. And how do you stop that? Well, you can't. I mean, there's nothing you can do proactively to keep someone from going into a store, lying on a form, taking the gun, buying it, going home with it, and then shipping it off to their buddy in Mexico for a profit. Like, you're just not going to proactively. You can catch those people, you can prosecute those people, you can disincentivize future action by making the consequences very high, but it is what it is. And same thing with the manufacturers. Like, Colt is Colt a bad company because their guns are popular among strong straw purchasers who then export those guns to Mexico? That's not Colt's fault.
Yeah, especially if you talk about like someone like Cabela's, who has like many stores all the way across the U.S. And if their 4 of their stores get hit in the same exact way, then they're going to pop up on this list as like one of the primary issues when there just happen to be one of the places. And the people that are buying these are all, they were, before they started buying these, upstanding citizens. They're passing all of the background checks. So these are people who are deciding to break the law ahead of time. They're not, this isn't the companies that are breaking the law. It's the people themselves who are, lying on the forms and transporting and distributing these weapons.
Yeah. So I think we have to put the blame where the blame belongs. That said, I am sympathetic. To Mexico's feeling or perception, even reality, that the vast majority of the guns being used illegal in Mexico are coming from the U.S. That's pretty factual. Like, there's enough data to say that's pretty true. But I think what we have to understand from like an economist perspective is that criminals always take the path of least resistance, right? Like, Mexican drug cartels want guns. They're going to get them. I promise. They're going to get guns. Today, like in any given day, they're going to do whatever is the easiest, least expensive thing that they can do to get guns. And when that stops being an option, they'll take the next most convenient and least expensive option available to them. Like, you shut down one option, they'll find another. So I think that's what bugs me about this kind of thing. We see this a lot too, like New York. Like, let's bring it domestic right now. That's not what this article is about. But New York and Illinois, especially New York, we see this a lot. They're constantly complaining about how guns being seized at crime scenes in New York are coming from North and South Carolina, Virginia, from these other states. Okay, I believe you. I don't think they're lying about that. I think that's probably true. I just don't think it matters. Like, it's irrelevant. So then you think that if all 50 states had the same kind of laws that New York had, then there would just not be any guns in New York? Like, suddenly the criminals in New York would be like, guess we can't get guns anymore, guys. All the other states got the same laws we do.
Time to get a real job.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess there goes the supply and demand for cocaine. You know, like that's not how it goes. Like they're gonna get guns. They'll just find whatever the next most convenient and least expensive option is. So like that's the kind of thing that drives me crazy. Is this like we have politicians pushing for universal background checks. They're upset that you can go to, like in the case of Colorado where you and I live, there's no private transfers of guns without a background check, right? So if Brian wants to sell Jacob a gun, we got to go to a gun store, we got to fill out paperwork, got to pass a background check. So across the border, though, any border touching Colorado, any border, so New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, in any of those states, that's not true. Any private transfers are perfectly legal. So, someone can just walk up to they can put an ad online and be like, buy handgun, meet me in parking lot. And someone can show up like, yeah, here's your gun. Give me $500. Like, thank you. That's legal in most states and every state touching Colorado and a whole bunch of states around New York. Right. And so it's easy for Colorado politicians to be like, well, that's not okay because it's just, we passed this law to make it so these criminals couldn't get guns. They had to pass background checks. And now they're just getting them from all these other states where they don't have to pass background checks. And that's not cool, man. Well, look at what's happening in Mexico. In Mexico, they just said, well, we'll just then pay someone who can pass a background check to go buy 287 of them and just bring them over or ship them in refrigerators, as it were. So if you think that somehow like forcing, like having universal background checks is just going to keep bad guys from getting guns, I'm sorry, New York. I'm sorry, Colorado. I'm sorry, these states who are blaming other states for the guns being trafficked. You're a crazy fool if you think that's going to be the thing that's going to stop it from happening.
I always wonder about this because this is one of those, it's always one of those knee-jerk reactions where they say, oh, this happened, so we need to have a law that makes this not happen anymore. And that's kind of one of the things that I kind of see is that if you're going to allow the public to purchase guns on any level, there's always going to be those issues, those workarounds or those people that don't use the system correctly or circumvent it criminally. And I think that there's no way around that. You're just going to have that at some point. I'd be willing to listen to alternative options, like what else could we do to prevent these guns going down to Mexico? Like I don't want that to happen, but also I don't want to limit, the American freedom to be able to purchase their own weapons. So it just seems like there's a lot of politicians that are trying to figure out a law to, prevent this from happening at all, when I don't know if that's even going to be possible if you're going to still have your rights.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm no expert. I like you. I'm happy to listen to proposals that aren't ridiculous. If they ever come up, let me know. But I will throw out one thing real quick. We got this guy who's mentioned in this article who straw purchased like 200 and something guns and shipped them to Mexico to drug cartels. He was caught. He was prosecuted. He went to jail. He got out of jail in 4 years. Okay. Like there's one thing I point at right now. Like if our negative consequence, if the thing, like the stick, like the carrot and the stick, right? If our stick is, man, if you do this naughty thing, we're going to put you in jail for like 4 years. That's unlikely to be effective at stopping someone who's getting paid a lot of money from a Mexican drug cartel to do it. So for whatever that's worth.
Yeah.
All right. Our last story coming from Tennessee.
Tennessee is among the top states for gun sales at the beginning of 2024. Here's how many were sold. So this is an interesting article I thought was that just came out here a little bit ago. The year isn't even over yet, but Tennessee is already leading the charge. In the analysis, this is an analysis coming from the FBI's National Instant Criminal Background Check System, or NICS. And it is in the analysis, it says that it found almost 5.5 million guns have been sold nationwide in the first 4 months of 2024. And then Tennessee's total gun sales went down by 4% from 2022 to 2023. And there's a pretty cool little infographic here that shows that the increase in gun sales across the U.S.
or the decrease, as it were. Yeah.
Oh, decrease. Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, depending on the state we're talking about. Yeah, so I
Right.
agree. Like, if you aren't from Tennessee and you're like, well, why do I care about this news story? It's actually really cool. Like, go find the link in our show notes when this episode publishes because it has data for all states. It just is focused on Tennessee because they're the only ones that show up in the top 10 of states in terms of highest gun sales in total volume, and also the top 10 of highest sales per capita. So Tennessee is kind of being called out here because, like, hey, we're in both of these top 10 lists. We're the only ones who are. But there's a lot of good information here for the whole country, and it's interesting. First, you should know these are estimates. The government, the NICS data does not perfectly tell us how many guns are sold. It tells us how many background checks are run. But for a very long time, for decades, people have been attempting to extrapolate from that data an estimate of how many guns are actually sold. It's not a perfect system, though, because you might walk into a gun store and buy 5 guns. That's one background check. You might walk into a store, have a background check run, and not buy a gun, whether because the background check failed or because you just changed your mind. So the point is, it's no perfect estimate of the number of guns being sold. It can't account for private gun sales either, but for whatever it's, we've been reliant on this data because it's the best data we have for a very long time. And the vast majority of states saw a decrease. In Colorado, year over year, 11% less guns were sold. Utah, 5% less. Nevada, 9% less. New York, 15% less. Louisiana, 15% less. Texas, 7% less. So very few states actually saw an increase. Florida certainly did. North Carolina did, and Illinois did, and New Hampshire did. But those might be the only states I actually see from all 50 states that actually saw an increase in gun sales from 2020. Okay, let me make sure we get the exact dates right here. That's year over year. That's from 2022 to 2023. Now we would anticipate in 2024 to see an increase if history is any sort of indicator, because elections tend to drive increased gun sales. But so far, certainly I can tell you in the presidential debate we just had, right, that gun control was never brought up. So we'll see how much, or if at all, guns become a central focus point of the Trump and or Biden campaigns, because so far it was not an issue that came up.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that's been very well talked about so far, leading up to all of the debates for this presidential election. I don't hear nearly as much talking about the Second Amendment as I seem to have in the previous years.
Yeah, time will tell. Like, we'll see. Like, it could be like they will talk about whatever they think will win them elections. So we, the people, get to put the pressure on them to force them to talk about guns if we want to, right? Like, we need to demand that to be an issue if you care about it, which I do. So anyway, for whatever that's worth. But yeah, I thought this was interesting. The top 10 states, in case you're curious, that sell the most guns. This is by volume, not per capita. Number one, this is last year in 2023. This is in order from number 1 to number 10. Texas, Florida, California. Those are your 3 most populous states, by the way, so that makes sense. Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Ohio, Virginia, Michigan, Missouri, Illinois. And then here's your top 10 by per capita, which is probably a little bit of a more interesting perspective. Number 1, this is Montana. Go ahead.
Number of guns sold per 10,000 people 21 years and older, right?
Correct. Yeah. So it's a much more like for every 1,000 adults, how many are how many guns did they buy kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So Montana is number 1. Number 2 is Wyoming, and number 3 is Alaska. I love it, man. I love it. That just makes me so happy inside. 4 is Oregon, then followed by Alabama, New Hampshire, Tennessee, West Virginia, North Dakota, and Idaho. So the vast majority of these don't have relatively low populations. I mean, Tennessee and Oregon stick out as states that have some decent population, but Montana, Wyoming, Alaska, Alabama, New Hampshire, West Virginia, North Dakota, Idaho, those are not states with big population centers. So those are rural states relatively that are buying a lot of guns given the number of people that live there.
Interesting.
Yeah, good times. Well, I think that's a wrap up for our stories. Brian, anything else you wanted to add to anything we've discussed so far?
Whew, no, that's just a lot of craziness going on. I'm excited to see where it all goes. I know this election cycle is about to start kicking off here in a little bit, and I'm not looking forward to it at all, but it'll be interesting. Very
Yeah.
Game of Thrones kind of stuff out there.
True that. I see here in our prep work for the podcast, we have a quote of the day. Brian, you want to share that with the audience?
I would love to. This is a quote that I ran into that I thought was something that I think is a bit appropriate to what our conversations are today, dealing with the government and that kind of thing. And it says, the society that separates its scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. And that is by Thucydides. I don't know how you say that, but he was a Greek philosopher and a general back in the day. And I just thought that was an interesting take on things and something that I personally agree with.
Yeah, I was going to assume he was Greek. It just looked Greek to me, but I honestly had no idea. I love it. I love it. As always, we would encourage you to subscribe to the podcast on your mobile or listening device. It's the surest, easiest way of always having access to our podcast. If you need help with any specific podcast app or how to subscribe, you can go to our website, concealedcarry.com/subscribe-to-podcast. You can generally find that link in our show notes as well. If you haven't already liked us on all the socials, written us a review wherever you like to listen, please do that. We certainly would appreciate any positive reviews and anything you do to share the podcast with others. Super, super grateful. Remember always to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care, everyone.